here in Malpensa. We are going to be flying the Diamond DA62 today, which is my favorite plane. We are going to be flying to Zurich. So we are going to be flying over some beautiful scenery. This is a flight that I stumbled upon by accident quite a while ago, and I love making this flight because the scenery is gorgeous and it shows off the beauty of this simulator while also just being a fun flight. So you see the DA62 is a twin engine luxury plane. It is very capable, travels at a higher rate of speed than the SR22, which we flew last time, and it's just a really great plane. If I ever was very wealthy, this would probably be the plane that I would buy. So let's go ahead and get started. Oops. We have our ATC window open for some reason. Okay, so first things first, to start this plane we have to turn on the fuel to both engines. So we'll go ahead and do that. Fuel on. We are going to need to turn on the electronics master, the avionics master. Give everything a second to warm up here. We are going to do our right engine first. So we are going to turn on the fuel pump, turn on the master switch, turn on the alternator, and hold to start. Okay. So the right side engine is running. Looks good. If you're wondering what I'm looking at, I am looking at the, let me get it on the screen here. Right here you can see the RPMs are 731 on the right engine. It shows everything there, so looks good. Now let's do the left engine. So fuel pump on, master on, alternator on, hold, and good to go. Okay, so now both engines are running, and we are going to turn on our landing lights, our taxi lights, position, and strobe. And we'll try to remember to change those once we get airborne. Let's see here. So we need to set our altitude. We are going to cruise at an altitude, unless told otherwise, we are going to cruise at an altitude of 16,000 feet. Okay, so that is set. Let's set up our navigation. Okay. Bear with me here while I set up our heads-up display here. Okay. So now we need to request clearance. Okay, so he said 12,000 feet. We need to set our... Okay, acknowledge that. So now we're going to request our taxi. Okay. So we are going to be, and of course it's directly behind us, so we're going to request a pushback to the right. Now, pushback can be a little glitchy sometimes. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It seems to depend on the airport, the parking spot, the plane. Everything seems to affect it. So, we'll see if it can happen smoothly this time. Doesn't look like it. So he is going to glitch into our plane, as he is currently doing. He's going to slide over to the right, glitch through the wing, and through the propeller, and through the engine, as we see there. And then he's going to pop into place. Oh. And apparently this time he's going to disappear. So that's a new one. I've never seen the engineer disappear like that before. But you know, you see something new every day. He's still pushing us back, so that's really all that matters at this point. See the private jet over there. Okay, so that should be far enough. Okay. So now we are going to tune to the tower, and we are going to throttle up a little bit here. Alright, so we've only got 2-mile-per-hour winds, not much wind to worry about. We do have some clouds in the distance, but it's pretty clear right here where we are. You see we are taxiing at a pretty high rate of speed. That is not something we really want to do. as I have mentioned before, it is hard to taxi with a controller. It can be difficult. It's hard to have fine throttle control with the controller. So we got quite a little taxi distance here. One thing I absolutely did not want to use when I first started using Flight Simulator was I did not want to use these blue arrows to help me taxi. I felt like it was immersion breaking, and I just don't like how they look. I don't like how it takes away from the realism of what is otherwise a very realistic simulator. But I very, very quickly learned that if you are flying in different places all over the world and you have no idea the layout of all these different... Okay, our taxi... It just disappeared. That's great. Okay, but yeah, when you don't know the layout of all these different airports and all their airstrips and everything else, it's impossible to maneuver around. Alright, so we are going to... You can see on the map there that the airstrip we are supposed to be using is to our right, so we are just going to make our own way over there. Okay, so this is runway 35. This is where we were trying to get to. For whatever reason, the ability to request takeoff clearance is not showing up. We might have to take off. I don't know if it's a bug or if I did something incorrectly, but it does not appear to be working properly. Let's see if it pops up when we get to this spot right here. Alright, well, we are going to have to take off without that. So we have our altitude set to 12,000 feet. Hopefully that is enough to clear the mountains ahead, because we are going to be flying over a mountain range. Everything still looks good on the engine. We are going to close this window for visibility's sake. We are going to throttle up and we are going to get airborne. So throttle up and holding. Everything looks good. And here we go. Still only dealing with a 2-mile-per-hour crosswind, so 1 to 2 miles per hour, not much to worry about there. Just want to get a nice smooth takeoff. Alright, let's elevate. And we are airborne. Make sure we are airborne and holding before we retract our gear. Okay, retracting gear. See we're not climbing quite as high. We're going to go ahead and raise our flaps. Not climbing at quite the rate I would like to see. Trim it up a little bit more. See if we can get a nice steady climb going. We got to get some elevation here, some altitude before we get to those mountains. So, alright, now we're climbing at a rate of about 600. Let's trim it up a little bit more. Keep an eye on our speed. Alright. Climbing at a rate of about 900. So normally, taking off without clearance like we did, ATC would yell at us for not having clearance to take off, but it must have been a bug or something, because they didn't yell at us. It never popped up to take off. It never popped up to be able to request clearance. So whatever it was, it seems to have bugged the whole system. So let's go ahead and set up our autopilot. We already have it set to 12,000 feet. We're going to turn on the flight director, put our navigation into nav mode, turn our autopilot on, and then we are going to set our vertical climb. We're going to set it at 800. I normally use 700, but we're going to set it at 800 because of the mountains coming up. I want to make sure that we are in the air plenty above them by the time we get to them. And our cruising altitude is going to be 12,000 feet. So you can see how beautiful this part of the world is. This is in and around Malpensa. I hope I'm saying that right. But it's really pretty. Looks like the kind of place that would be really nice to go visit. It is about 8:15 in the morning, and we are headed to Zurich. It's about 110 nautical miles from Malpensa to Zurich. So it's longer than the last flight that we did, but we're in a faster plane, so shouldn't take too much longer than the last flight. So we just want to keep an eye on our speed. You see our speed is a little bit low. for this plane, but we're climbing at a pretty good rate. We are dealing with, well, for a minute there it looked like we were dealing with a little bit of turbulence maybe, but maybe that was just a random couple of bumps there. Okay, so we are going to cut our engines down a little bit. This plane, I've noticed in this sim, oh wait a minute, it says our engines are set at 80%. I never turned them down that far. Maybe that's why we're struggling with speed. Alright, let's put our engines at 100 for a minute here. Must have done something wrong there before. So you see our speed is increasing now. We're at about 4,500 feet. We'll be crossing over these mountains soon, so we want to have as much elevation as possible. If you're too close to the mountaintops when you cross over a mountain range like this, the air becomes very turbulent and can be pretty rough on the plane. So we'll take a little bit closer look at this Diamond DA62. This plane is beautiful. It is, I don't know if I would say overpowered, but it's very powerful. You can safely fly this plane for long distances on one engine. So if an engine fails, you don't have to immediately land. You can safely make your way to a nearby airport and land the plane. You can even, if you don't have a safe place to land, you can finish your flight with one engine. The plane still performs extremely well with only one, and you know, that's kind of the goal with a plane like this, is to have an emergency backup. So if something fails on one engine, you aren't desperate to land as soon as that happens. You can kind of safely maneuver. So plenty of power, travels at a good rate of speed, very luxurious. If you look at the interior, it's an extremely nice airplane. There is actually a decent amount of cargo space from what I've seen. I've watched several reviews of this plane. While I'm thinking of it, let's turn our taxi and landing lights off. But yeah, this is my favorite plane. It's my favorite plane to fly. Has been for a while now. Alright, so we are going to cut our throttle back to about 92%. That's going to lower our speed just a little bit. It's not going to lower it a lot. One thing that I love about Flight Simulator is the attention to detail. And in a plane like this, you can see here, like if you look at this bar right here, when you zoom in on it, just look at the attention to detail in the textures. It's unbelievable. Somebody spent a lot of time making all of this clean and this detailed. And honestly, it's a little hard to believe that a game that came out in 2020, oops, and I just accidentally scrolled over that and lowered our altitude, but it's hard to believe that a game that came out in 2020 is still the best looking game on the market. And looks like it will be for a while. Um, so I chose to fly this in the morning because I've flown it at different times of the day, and this flight in the morning is particularly beautiful because of the shadows casting over the mountains. Um, I've flown this in the wintertime. This flight is taking place in June instead of December, even though it's December right now. Reason for that is when you fly over this in December, it is all just white. It's snow, and it's still very pretty, but it's not nearly as beautiful as it is when it's green. So I chose to fly over it in the early summer, just for the look of it, for how pretty it is. Now, one thing that this plane does have is it has a full suite, you can see here, of tools to combat icing, which is something you very much have to worry about in this simulator. So if we were flying over this in December, we would have to deal with that, but we don't have to right now. Switch on this. You see we're at about 8,700 feet right now, traveling at about 139 knots. And we are well on our way. Our approach is going to be a little more complicated, I guess, than some of the other flights that I've done. The different options that it gave us for approach had a little bit of doubling back that we have to do. Don't know how much of that we'll have to do manual or how much of it the autopilot can handle, but we'll certainly deal with that when we get there. So now, there was a huge update for Flight Simulator a couple months ago, maybe a little longer, and everybody was so excited about that update. It coincided with the launch of the Xbox Series version of Flight Simulator, so they were promising these huge performance gains, huge FPS boosts for everybody. You know, better water effects, snow effects. Some planes have skis on the bottom of them, and when you were skiing across the snow to take off or land, the snow effects were much improved. The water effects were non-existent before that update. Now, if you're in a seaplane and you land on the water, or if you're taking off, you actually leave a trail, leave a wake in the water. That was actually non-existent before this update. So for those of you who have never flown in Flight Simulator, this was pretty much claiming to be the ultimate update, and in some ways it was a really, really amazing update for the sim. But one of the things that it did that upset a lot of people in the PC world, because a lot of people have very powerful PCs, is it actually dumbed down the graphics for Flight Simulator. Now, it still looked better than any game on the market, but for people who have been flying it from day one, the trees didn't look as detailed and as clear from a distance. Roads and rivers and things like that weren't as clear and detailed from high altitudes or decent altitudes. The amount of detail seemed to suffer quite a bit. So with that amount of detail going away, the people that had a really powerful PC were obviously very upset, because they were having no trouble running the game at its highest settings, and the fact that those settings were no longer available, I mean, I love graphics as much as anything and as much as anyone, so I understand why they were so upset. And of course, in subsequent patches, they have brought the graphics back to where they were before, which you can see is incredible. Um, but a lot of the performance gains that came from that update, even though turning the graphics back up with their later updates took that away a little bit, it actually did still perform. So the performance is still better now on Flight Sim than it was before that patch. So they had to work out some bugs and some kinks, and some people have had problems with uh, driver updates and things like that causing crash to desktop and those types of things, which I've experienced that myself. I've had a driver update completely bug the game where it crashed every 2 minutes or so, and so I had to roll back to a previous NVIDIA driver just to be able to run the game. So it's certainly not perfect. It is, as much as we love to call it a simulator, it is still a video game, and video games are very seldom perfect. So it's really good though, and it's the kind of thing, this when Microsoft created this, you know, a game that's meant to be a game is going to get a ton of attention for a year or two. Something like like an Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed game comes out, and it's going to get a ton of support and some DLC updates for the first year, maybe year and a half, and then it's just going to get incremental patches from that point on, and it's going to mostly be ignored by Ubisoft, who make it, because they have already moved on to the next Assassin's Creed. But something like Flight Simulator is it's more of a platform. Something like this is people will still be playing this simulator 10 years from now. There might be a new one by then, but even the one before this simulator, people are still playing it. So it's the kind of thing where when these guys create something like this, it is definitely a marathon. They created this with the purpose of it being used, improved, modified, and played by tons of people for a decade. And so you can tell, they've already improved the scenery in so many places around the world. They've improved the cities, they've improved landmarks, they've done so many things to improve it, and you can just only imagine how much better it's going to get over the next number of years, because they will be supporting this for so long. And then after they quit supporting it, the community will continue to support it. A lot of community locations, custom locations, a lot of community aircraft. It's something that excuse me, something that's very exciting. If you love to fly and you love what this sim brings to the table, then it's very, very exciting to know that it'll be supported for a very, very long time. So, and they even talked about when they first released it, they talked about being able to do graphics updates to actually improve the graphics down the road. So, which is incredible considering it's already the best looking game there is. It would be pretty amazing if 4 or 5 years down the road we're still talking about Flight Sim 2020 as being the best looking game on the market, which is very possible. So, but anyway, sorry for the history lesson about Flight Sim, but you can see we're over the mountains here, and the detail is pretty incredible. This flight, let's take a look at, while we're here, let's take a look at the rest of our, oops, I always scroll the wrong way first. So the rest of our flight plan. So here is, we are going to come near Zurich, and then we are going to take a left turn, loop around, take a right turn, loop back down, be past the airport, then loop back to our left and make our approach to land. So it's like I said before, it's no doubt because of traffic and other reasons that they have us using this approach. So we will have to, what we need to do actually is we need to try to contact Zurich. Okay, so we got time. We're just gonna tinker around a little bit, take a look at what the nearest airports are that are showing up farther. See if Zurich shows up yet. Oops, whoops. No. Okay. So we are going to, I think our ATC might be bugged. We'll see if they contact us with altitude changes and things like that. I've been lucky. I haven't had too many problems with ATC other than just some, weird things where they tell me to ascend to an altitude that I'm already at and stuff like that. There was one patch that came out a while back where that happened all the time. You would be at 10,000 feet and they would tell you to expedite your climb to 10,000 feet, and of course there's no way to tell them I'm already at 10,000 feet, so you just have them constantly hounding you to climb to a certain altitude that you're already at. So that was a fun bug that lasted for probably a week or so, and then they patched it and got it fixed. You see these towns down in between the mountains here. Imagine living in one of these towns out here in the countryside with mountains all around you. You're very far from any major cities or anything like that. It must be a beautiful place to visit, I would imagine. Okay, so we are still cruising. Everything is good. Let's check on our fuel just to make sure we're good there. Oh yeah, we have a lot of fuel, so we're perfectly fine there. We have 23.5 miles to our next waypoint. So got a little time to just cruise and look at the scenery. I have never flown a plane over these mountains in real life, but I can only imagine how beautiful it must be. I mean, it's beautiful here, but to be able to see it in person and you could fully grasp the scale of the mountains from above, it's got to be really breathtaking. So See the little towns down in between the mountains. Really, really cool. When I first started flying on Flight Simulator, I didn't know how to operate the autopilot. So, because I didn't go on YouTube and watch the videos telling me how to operate a G1000, which a lot of the planes that I fly use the G1000. The Cessna that I like to fly uses the G1000. This plane uses the G1000. The smaller Diamond plane, the DA-40, uses the G1000. So until I went and watched several YouTube videos, I don't know about several, but one or two, about how to use the navigation system on these planes, I was doing all of my flights manually. And so if I was doing an hour flight, I was fighting turbulence and drift and counter or crosswinds or whatever. I was literally manually flying for over an hour from location to location, which I enjoyed. I mean, it was a lot of constant adjustments and constant tweaking, and you know, you could never take a second to look at the scenery hardly, because you're trying to keep the plane going in the right direction the whole time. But once you learn how to operate the autopilot on these planes, it's almost too easy. You only have to deal with the takeoff, which most planes, the takeoff, unless you have a strong crosswind or something, takeoff is pretty straightforward. It's not too difficult. Now, landing, on the other hand, landing can be a challenge. Absolutely, it can be a challenge. And every plane is different. Every plane lands differently. Every plane needs to be moving at different speeds when landing. That can be a challenge. But if you know how to use the systems on a plane like this, you set everything up, set your altitude, you get up in the air, you follow the course for a little bit till you're clear of the airport and everything's settled enough that you can take your eyes off and set up your autopilot. And once you engage the autopilot and set the altitude, then you are just along for the ride. You get to just sit and relax and look at the beautiful scenery. And with a sim like this one, you can fly anywhere in the world. So the challenge then becomes finding scenery beautiful enough that you can entertain yourself while the plane flies itself. Because if you didn't have beautiful scenery, if you're flying over a desert, which I have done, if it's just sand as far as you can see in all directions, it can get a little boring. I still enjoy it because I love flying, but I can understand where some people would look at this even and say, how can you stand to do an hour-long flight when you're not really doing anything 89% of the time? But I guess even though I'm older now, my imagination is still good enough that I can imagine as if I'm actually here. I'm actually in the plane, and I'm actually above these mountains, and I'm actually making this flight myself. If that ability to imagine and make it feel real ever goes away, then yeah, I probably wouldn't enjoy Flight Simulator quite so much anymore. But for now, I really enjoy it. Uh-oh, they're talking to us. What are they saying? Acknowledge handoff. Zurich approach. Contact Zurich. So we are okay, so apparently everybody is just going to hand us off to everybody else. So as you can see, the mountains are behind us. We've finally gotten clear of the mountain range. And if the mountain range wasn't there, if that wasn't part of this flight, I probably would have never discovered this flight, because it was early in the morning. Who are they handing us off to now? Okay, so they're just handing us back and forth at this point. Let's take a closer look at our, let's close this. Okay, so we are getting closer now. I don't understand why they are just handing us off back and forth and back and forth. But we are going to begin to descend. I think our ATC might be glitched because they are just handing us off back and forth. We are still going to acknowledge them, otherwise they are not going to shut up. So we will acknowledge them. Okay. So we are going to begin our descent. We've got quite a ways to come down, so hopefully we gave ourselves enough time. Let's go ahead and set this to 2,000. We are descending at a rate of 900. Close that. Still over 10,000 feet. We are going to make this turn keep a close eye on our autopilot and make sure that it can actually handle all these turns that are coming up. And we need to back off the throttle because we are getting a little too fast. We're going to back off the throttle quite a bit, descending at a rate of 900. Get our speed back where we want it. So we're under 10,000 feet now. Excuse me. We might have started our descent too soon, but the problem is I don't know if ATC is working properly, so they might not tell us to descend when we're supposed to. So we might end up in a situation where we are still way too high by the time we get to our final approach. So we're just going to go ahead and get ourselves down at a good altitude, and then if they yell at us, they yell at us, but I don't think they're going to, because I think it is either bugged out or glitched or something, because they haven't, all they've told us to do is continue, and they've handed us off back and forth between approach and tower, and it's the center channel. They've just kind of handed us back and forth. So not sure if it's working properly or not. So we're approaching 8,000 feet. So you see the clouds, they're not going to be a problem. It's kind of scattered clouds, not too heavy, not too light, just kind of enough clouds to make it pretty to look at. That's about it. Keep an eye on our speed. We're still moving at about 140 knots. Now going past 7,000 feet. So we are looking good. Below 7,000 feet, still making this loop around before we make our final approach. Well, Zurich is definitely a beautiful place, and Malpensa is also very pretty. But the real beauty is all the small towns that we flew over that reside in between all those mountains. Those are pretty. I cannot imagine how cool it must be to visit those kind of towns. I don't know if I'd want to live there that far from civilization, um, but to visit, to take a trip to one of those small towns down in the valley between all those mountains, it's got to be awesome. So, I know I've only been to small mountains in the Smoky Mountains in Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee. And if I ever leave Florida, that's where I'm going because I loved it. I loved everything about it. Love being in the mountains, being able to see for miles from a mountain top, and then when you're down in the valley, having the mountains tower over you. See some air traffic about to fly over us here. See if we can spot them. Don't see them. It's going to be forward to our left. Okay, there we go. I see the lights, the strobes flashing. You see him flying overhead there. Okay, so we're about to 4,000 feet. We're about to make this long sweeping right turn. It's showing another plane flying above us right now, but I don't see that one. So we've got to keep an eye on the autopilot to make sure that it's going to make this turn properly. We got to be ready to switch that autopilot off when we get to our final approach. You can see we are now making the turn. We might, just might, have our altitude set too low. We still got some hills here we got to deal with. We don't want to get so low that we have to dodge these. So we are going to set our altitude at 3,000. See if that's high enough to avoid these. Looks like it's going to be just high enough. So maybe not the way we should have done it. Alright, we're being handed off again. You see how close we are to this hilltop. Cutting it a little bit close there. We are at 3,000 feet. It really is pretty here. We're going to make a little bit more of a turn here. Okay, so now that we are not descending, we need to get our throttle back up some because we're a little low on speed. I don't understand why they keep handing us off. Alright, so we will just take one final look at this approach. I always go the wrong way the first time. So we are going to make a hard right, go back over where we just were, and then we're going to loop around to the left and then make our final approach. You see there's quite a bit of air traffic in the vicinity right now, and that is no doubt why they have us approaching the way that we are. So we are 9 miles from the end of this section, which you see the red line. So we're 9 miles from the end of this red line where it turns to white, and then however many miles it is for that. So it's quite a bit of flying in and around Zurich to avoid other air traffic and then to make our final approach. But this is how flying is really done, so that's what we're going to do. Alright. So since we are in our approach, we are going to go ahead and turn on our landing lights so that we are prepared for that. Let's take a look. There they are. Turn those on so that we're ready to land. So this is kind of a hard right-hand turn here. See how well the autopilot handles that. So far we haven't had to switch off the autopilot. It's done a good job. Here it goes, starting to turn. You see how beautiful the river is winding through. It's really nice. So one thing we haven't done yet is we have not spotted the airport yet. I always like to see how far away I can get a visual. We're still a decent ways away from the landing strip right now, though. Alright, so it is showing, looks like the airport might be right on the other side of this hill right here. I don't know if it's not enough to call it a mountain, I don't think, but maybe a foothill. Still can't quite see it. I know it's somewhere over there. Oh wait, there it is. There it is. You can see it. I was looking too close. You can see the airstrip over there. That is where we are heading. Alright. So we are going to continue forward for a little bit further, and then we're going to make 2 sets of left turns, and then that will be our final approach. We will have a straight shot into our runway, I think maybe the next time I fly into Zurich, I might need to keep my altitude at closer to 4,000 feet until we get closer to the actual airstrip. I mean, this is really cool being able to see everything so up close, but I don't think that's really how you're supposed to do it. I don't claim to be a real pilot. I'm trying to learn as much as I can about what you do and don't do, and I've learned a lot. I've watched a ton of YouTube videos and a little bit of reading, and hope to one day take actual flight training and learn how to fly. I think that would be really fun. But for now, we'll just have to do it in a simulator. See somebody flying low over there. This is a very long roundabout path they have us taking. A lot of time spent preparing to approach. The actual approach is going to be very short. We're gonna get right on the ground, looks like. So So you see how long we've been flying since we left Malpensa. I have actually done this entire flight manually at least 2 or 3 times. So this amount of time manually flying the plane, trying to keep it on course, trying to keep altitude, doing everything absolutely the hard way. Then the approach, the landing, and everything, doing everything manually. And I actually enjoyed it, but I don't think that was a sustainable way to enjoy this hobby of flying, because it was a lot of constant attention needed. You couldn't really look away. Even you couldn't look at your instruments hardly, because as soon as you looked away, looked down like this, you're either diving or you're sliding off to the left or you're sliding off to the right, or the wind is pushing you one way or the other, or it was just a constant, like, white knuckle experience. You're on it the whole time. And I think it would be a lot less than fun if I were to try that now that I have as much time spent flying as I do. I don't think I could fly that way anymore. But it was a fun way to start, and then I learned how to operate the nav equipment on board the planes, which added a lot of depth. And not every plane, but there are planes like the SR-22 that we flew in our last flight, that has a different. It has the G1000, but it kind of has its own version of the G1000. So the button layout is different. It has like a dashboard that's down here in the middle that has a lot of the autopilot controls. and stuff like that. So you have to get used to a new set of controls, and but it's fun. I enjoy learning about aircraft. The thing that is so awesome to me about flying in this sim is if I ever were lucky enough to get to fly in a DA-62, which is the plane we're in right now, if I'm sitting over here in the co-pilot seat and I'm watching the pilot, I'm going to know what he's doing. I'm going to understand like what he's doing, how he's setting everything up. And to me, that's awesome. Just to have that knowledge, to understand what's going on. Really, really cool. And I hope to get to experience that in a plane that uses a system that I'm familiar with, so that I can kind of, watch it done in real life, in person. And something I really, really enjoyed. What is that over there? Can't tell what that is, but it looks like, well, maybe it's just buildings. Yeah, it's just buildings. Okay. And you see the bridge down here below us. Very cool. And you see the cars driving underneath the bridge. I don't know if that's actually how that works, but in the sim, that's what we get. The bridge is there, but the cars are driving underneath it for some reason. Alright, so we are making the turn here. We got one more turn after this one to the left, and then it is going to be time to approach and put this thing on the ground. So hopefully we don't have any issues today. It's been quite a while since I've landed this plane. I have done quite a few flights in this plane several months ago. Hopefully we can pull it off without any drama. I always say the kind of landing you want to have is the kind that you will never remember, because if you don't remember it, that means nothing eventful happened. Because typically with a landing, the only way it's memorable is if it was bad. So we don't want a bad landing. We want something nice and smooth. So we are going to be making that final left turn here in a minute. One thing I'm not sure of, if any of you actually have flight experience, and you can tell me how much of this sequence, the doubling back and the series of turns and then the final approach, how much of this in the real world would you be instructed to do manually? Would they expect you to do all of this manually, or do most pilots use autopilot right up until the final approach? Am I kind of cheating the system? Because I really don't know. I would like to be able to do it the right way, whichever way is realistic. So if any of you have any flight experience and can tell me, that would be awesome, because whichever way it's supposed to be done, that's the way I want to do it. So okay, so we've made our final turn. We're about to cross into the last leg of our flight. You hear ATC communicating with other aircraft. Can't quite see the airport yet. So we have just enough to make it over this hill here. It's going to be close, but we are just going to make it. You see the plane coming in there. Is this guy coming in to land on the same airstrip we are? Because that could be a problem. Now, he is certainly not supposed to be that low in a plane that big. Okay, you can see the airfield up ahead. So sometimes when you're flying in Flight Simulator, you have, let's see, how far are we from our destination? It says 2.8 miles. I don't know if that's accurate. Sometimes when you're flying in this simulator, you run into people who don't use ATC, don't follow any rules. They just kind of do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it. And maybe they are following ATC, I don't know. But they kind of do things their own way. And I've seen people taking off from tiny little airfields in huge jumbo jets. And I've seen people trying to land on tiny little airfields with huge jumbo jets and crashing horribly. And I've seen if any of you had this sim whenever okay, we are going to switch to manual control because we are at that point now. So autopilot is off. We are going to start to descend. We're going to throttle back. And it does look like this guy is landing in front of us. So I'm going to put our gear down. Obviously, in real life, you would never follow another plane in for a landing. Well, I guess in major airports they do that. But he is much faster than we are and much bigger than we are. But we are going to let him lead the way here. Okay, so we are making our final approach. We just want to... Okay, so he bailed out of it. He bailed out of it. We are coming down. We are on the ground. we are going to tune to ground. Acknowledge that. Okay, so they're warning us about other traffic, although I don't see any. Besides this van that is parked in the middle of the road here. Quite a few ground vehicles buzzing around. I think that's something that Flight Simulator definitely does that would not be so much the case. I've been in airports, even smaller airports. There are vehicles moving around, fuel trucks and things such as that, but typically they don't get in the way. They typically have a few areas that they travel back and forth to and kind of stay out of the way. Whereas in Flight Simulator, sometimes they're driving all over the place and in the way a lot. So, but once again, this is the kind of things that I think they're going to do updates for as time goes by. They're going to improve these types of things to make the experience even more realistic, because there's people, a lot of people, who play this sim and they do so in a very serious manner. They've got a full flight rig set up with joystick and throttle, multiple screens, all kinds of background apps running, giving them information about weather, flight traffic. Some of them use alternative ATC programs where you have real people giving you flight traffic and giving you instructions. People get really, it's just like sim racing or any other type of hobby, people get very, very serious about flying. And as much as I would love to do that myself and get that serious about it, I am way too bipolar to be able to just stay with one hobby that consistently. I play all kinds of games. I do all kinds of game type hobbies like racing and adventure games like Red Dead Redemption, and I love to fly. I love to do all of this stuff, and so I couldn't ever have my whole setup focused on one form of gaming, because I enjoy all the different forms of gaming way too much. But guys, we finally made it. Nice long flight. This was a good one. We are going to shut our engines down. Right engine first. Left engine second. And we are going to turn, well, we're going to turn our fuel pumps off too, because we should have done that in the first place. And then we're going to turn off our electronics and our AV. And that is going to be it. Thanks a lot for flying along with me. I hope you enjoyed it. This was a pretty long flight. I typically try to do shorter flights. I like this flight. I've done it a number of times, and so that's part of why I put up with the length of it, because I just love the scenery and everything along the way. And I love these two towns, cities in this part of the world, really beautiful. Um, but we'll do some uh, more local. I'm in the U.S., so a good percentage of my flights take place in the U.S. So we'll do some more of that coming up. And thanks a lot for watching. Y'all have a great weekend.